Hey guys, it's Chris. From a disastrous polar expedition to a terrifying trip at sea, here are the most incredible stories of survival you've never heard before. Number 10. Sir Douglas Mawson. Sir Douglas Mawson went on an expedition to Antarctica over 100 years ago and had the worst time of his life. He departed Commonwealth Bay on November 10th of 1912 after arriving in the polar region from Australia. He and 2 other explorers went on foot, taking with them 3 sledges to be pulled by 16 huskies. They had about 1,720 pounds of food, plenty of survival gear, and all the necessary scientific instruments. They traveled about 300 miles in just over a month, moving inland across Antarctica. But then things started to get strange. One of the dogs was spotted eating her own babies after giving birth. One of the explorers nearly fell through a crack in the ice. Douglas himself had accidentally split his lip because of the cold, and he was in terrible pain. And another member of the party had snow blindness. It was looking pretty grim. Soon enough, one of the team members fell into a crevice and died. He was about 150 feet down into a crack of ice, taking all their food with him. The others had no choice but to turn back, but soon the second man perished, leaving Douglas Mawson alone in Antarctica, 100 miles from the nearest person. What followed was a horrifying trip in which Douglas Mawson was ravaged by the cold. His skin melted off from lack of nutrition mixed with frostbite. And by the time he finally got back to base camp, broken and weak and just moments away from death, the rescue ship had already gone back to Australia. He was forced to stay a second winter in Antarctica, but may have been for the better, as the team left behind at base camp was able to nurse him back to health. Number 9. Jose Salvador Alvarenga. Jose Salvador Alvarenga spent 438 days stuck in the Pacific Ocean. He had nothing but a 25-foot fishing boat with no sail and no motor, and no hope of survival. His nightmare began on November 17, 2012, when he set off from Costa Azul, Mexico, for a 2-day fishing trip to catch some sharks. He went 100 miles offshore with his fishing partner, hoping to make a little bit of money in the small coastal village where they lived. Even though both men knew a storm was coming, they didn't think it would be a big deal. And according to Jose, it wasn't the storm that caused the problem. The problem came when the engine gave out, and the 2 men had their boat thrashed for 7 days by the storm out at sea. They lost the radio and their fishing gear. By the time the storm passed, the 2 men had nothing but a bucket between them. Their boat had also drifted very far from Mexico. Lost at sea, Jose managed to catch fish without using a hook or line by literally snatching them out of the water. But fish did not prove enough. Jose started catching seabirds that landed on the vessel near them, then eating the birds like raw chicken. Jose and his companions then drank the birds' blood to sustain themselves. Jose's friend died after just 2 weeks out at sea, and somehow Jose went on surviving for over 400 days more until he landed on the Marshall Islands and was saved by locals on the beach. He did make a full recovery, and he was flown back to his native country of El Salvador, though Jose has never again gone into the ocean. Number 8. Ricky McGee. In Australia, a man named Ricky McGee survived in the outback for 2.5 months by eating nothing but frogs and snakes and lizards. His car broke down on January 23rd while he drove along the Bunteen Highway, straddling the border between the Northern Territory and Western Australia. For whatever crazy reason, he then decided to wander away from his vehicle. And it was at that point that he got lost and ended up wandering deeper and deeper into the outback. He had no idea where he was, which direction he was supposed to go, or how he was supposed to survive. Ricky built a primitive shelter near a dam, drinking the water he found there and catching small reptiles wherever he had the chance. This went on for a while before he pushed the rest of the way through the outback. It took 10 weeks for him to finally make it back to civilization, at which point he came across a man named Mark Clifford, who'd been managing the Birrindudu cattle station. Ricky had lost almost all of his weight and was quickly taken to the hospital. But even after Ricky made a full recovery and was discharged from the hospital just days after being admitted, the authorities could not locate his vehicle. Nobody could figure out where he began his journey into the outback or what happened to his car. Someone either stole it or Ricky was dropped into the middle of the desert by aliens. So what do you think happened to Ricky's car? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, then please be sure to hit that thumbs up and the subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 7. Angela Hernandez. Angela Hernandez from Oregon accidentally drove her SUV off a cliff in California and plummeted 250 feet into a remote beach below. It all happened on July 6th, when the 23-year-old woman was passing through Big Sur. Something moved in front of her on the road. She swerved to avoid the critter and she went right off the shoulder. Angela blacked out after her crash, and when she woke up, she was trapped in her vehicle as it was filling with water. According to Angela herself, she could feel the water rising over her knees. She managed to swim to shore and she passed out. Angela would spend the next few days dehydrated, disoriented, and injured. She had nothing to eat, she had nowhere to go, and she was stuck at the bottom of the cliff, unable to get back up to the road. The worst part is that she could hear and even see the cars driving past on the road above, but she was hopeless to catch their attention. This poor woman was stuck for 7 days in absolutely horrendous shape before a couple finally decided to take a leisurely hike along the beach and heard Angela's screams for help. The couple ran to the woman's aid. They called the police, and rescue services soon hoisted Angela up the cliff and then airlifted her to the hospital, where doctors found she had a brain hemorrhage, a collapsed lung, fractured ribs, and broken bones. It was amazing that she survived 7 days sitting on a rocky beach getting splashed by salt water. Number 6. Real-life Tarzan. Ho Van Tine spent 41 years living in the forests of Vietnam after fleeing from the war. This guy's the closest thing you'll ever find to a real-life Tarzan. He was an army veteran who fled from his small village in 1972. With his infant son, after a bomb dropped by forces from the United States of America killed his innocent wife and his other 2 children. Ho and his son retreated into the forest in the Tay Tra district of Quang Ngay province and weren't seen again until 2013. Since locals found them 8 years ago, Ho and his son have been adapting to civilized society. But before that, they've been kind of living in tree houses and wearing loincloths like Mowgli. They typically hunted monkeys and rats, but nothing was off the menu, including snakes and bats and any fruits and vegetables they could get their hands on. Even though Ho had spent much of his life in civilization before fleeing into the jungle, his son hadn't. He hardly spoke any Vietnamese. He had no concept of time except for day and night. He knew nothing of the outside world and had not seen a woman once in his 41 years of living. He literally had no idea what a female was. But even more amazing than females were light bulbs and electricity, which the 41-year-old jungle boy had never witnessed. Number 5. The Robertson family. In January of 1971, the Robertson family climbed into their yacht and sailed away from England. 18 months later, they found themselves being attacked by a group of angry killer whales while out at sea. The killer whales actually destroyed their yacht and forced the family to board a leaky raft. They only had enough water for 10 days, and all they had to eat was a tin of biscuits and some oranges. They were at constant risk of sinking. Plus, sharks were circling them in the water too. Amazingly, the Robertson family did survive. The entire family went on living by hydrating themselves on turtle blood and eating whatever kinds of creatures got close enough to their raft to catch. Finally, a Japanese fishing boat happened upon them. The family was so dehydrated that none of them had peed for over 20 days, and their tongues were so swollen that they couldn't speak. The ship took them to Panama, where the family celebrated the rescue with a huge breakfast of steak and eggs. Number 4. Ada Blackjack. Ada Blackjack was born in the small settlement of Spruce Creek, Alaska. Her father died when she was young, and her mother sent her to a Methodist mission school far away in Nome, one of the most remote towns in the world. She married when she was 16 and had 3 children. Later, she got a divorce, which left her destitute. Then in 1921, she joined an Arctic expedition led by a Canadian explorer named Alan Crawford. Her job was to sew fur clothing for the expedition team. The expedition team was sent to Wrangel Island north of Siberia to claim the island for Canada. The conditions almost immediately turned bad. Rations ran out quickly, the team couldn't kill enough animals to survive, and within 4 months, 3 of the men abandoned the mission and tried to cross 700 miles of frozen Chukchi Sea to reach Siberia. Ada was left behind with a member of the team named Lorne Knight, who was suffering from scurvy. Ada cared for the man until he finally died on June 23rd of 1923. The 3 men who had gone in search of help were never seen from again, and Ada was alone in the middle of nowhere. Amazingly, Ada used her traditional skills to survive in the brutal conditions until she was rescued 8 months later in August. Newspapers at the time called her the real female Robinson Crusoe. Ada used the money she earned from the expedition to take her only surviving son to Seattle, where she cured his tuberculosis before remarrying, having another son, and then moving back to the Arctic and living until the age of 85. Number 3. Ernest Shackleton. Ernest Shackleton was an Antarctic explorer who led the fateful Endurance expedition from 1914 to 1916. He was chosen for his first Antarctic expedition in 1901 and joined a group of people who attempted to journey to the South Pole. They got closer to the South Pole than anyone before them, but Shackleton never finished the trip and had to go back home. He returned to the Antarctic in 1908, and he got even closer to the South Pole. And when he returned to Britain, he was knighted. But it was in 1914 when Shackleton made his third trip to the Antarctic on the ship Endurance. The vessel became trapped in the ice and sank 10 months later. By the time the ship sank, Singleton was living with the remaining crew on a floating piece of ice. It was brutal living. And after 2 years of misery in the Antarctic, Shackleton finally set off with a small crew of 3 boats and spent 16 days crossing the ocean before they finally reached a whaling station. Once there, Shackleton recruited help to go back and then rescue the rest of his crew. This is one of the most amazing stories of Antarctic survival because not a single member of the expedition died. Every single person survived, and Shackleton even went back to the Antarctic again in 1922 to circumnavigate the continent, but died of a heart attack before he could ever complete it. Number 2. Lamia Flight 2933. When Lamia Flight 2933 crashed in the Colombian mountains back in 2016, 71 people were killed. Only 6 people survived the horrifying incident, with one of them being a man named Erwin Tamiri, who told newspapers that the only reason he survived is that he followed protocol. He claims that he survived the air crash with minimal damage to himself because he put his bags between his legs and contorted himself into the fetal position. He also says that while he was doing this, he witnessed passengers rising from their seats and running around screaming. If his story is to be believed, then the next time you get on an aircraft, well, you better take that safety manual out from the seat pocket in front of you and get to reading. Luckily, those survivors didn't really need to hold on for too long. Rescue crews reached the wreckage of the aircraft quickly to evacuate the bodies of the deceased and get the survivors to a hospital. The reason the plane crashed at all is apparently because it never had enough fuel to reach its final destination. The pilot gambled and lost, resulting in dozens of deaths and broken families. Number 1. Anne Rogers. Anne Rogers was 72 years old at the time of her harrowing tale of survival. She was an ordinary Tucson resident who got lost on a remote part of the Fort Apache Indian Reservation after running out of fuel. She sat in her car for 2 days and never saw another vehicle pass by, so she wandered off to look for help. And she ended up in the Arizona wilderness, surviving by eating desert plants, drinking from a creek, and building small fires at night to keep warm. She was lost in the desert and nobody knew where she was. It would be over a week until she was found, and only because an officer from White River Tribal Game and Fish found her dog wandering loose in the wilderness. When an aerial search team found the remains of one of her shelters, she was finally spotted by her signal fire, waving at the aircraft. When Anne was rescued, she was in pretty rough shape. She'd spent 9 days in the wilderness and was pretty rugged, but Anne made a full recovery and even managed to get some gas to fill up her car, which was right where she left it. Thanks for watching. Do you think you could survive getting lost in the desert? Let me know about any experiences you've had in the comments below, and be sure to hit the subscribe button for more great videos. We'll see you next time.